Guys, hello everyone. So let's start our new chapter over here, which is supply and demand. For those who are watching online, sometimes it's hard to see what's on the whiteboard. For that reason, I'll try to speak through everything we'll put on the whiteboard, so hopefully that helps. Okay, now let me get my notes so I don't forget to mention every subtopic. Okay, and before we go into demand and supply, let's have a look at a couple of basic definitions. Okay, first we're starting with a market. Okay, I'll just use MKT because it's too long for me to write the full word market. But the market is basically, when I was a student, you know, I used to learn that a market is a place where buyers and sellers can exchange information and do business. Okay, that was many years ago, before much was happening on the internet, right? So since then, this definition has changed a little bit. It's not really, they don't say it's a place anymore. Any kind of arrangement. Okay, so any kind of arrangement. Any kind of arrangement where buyers and sellers can exchange information and do business. Okay, so there's that, and in economics we learned that there are different kinds of markets. Unfortunately, I think during this semester we will not have time to cover different kinds of markets. Hopefully by the end of this semester we will cover one type of market, which is competitive market. Okay, so we'll have a look at competitive markets. Competitive market is a market with many buyers and many sellers and similar products, so that none of the buyers or none of the sellers individually can affect the price. For example, from the perspective of the seller, if one of the buyers is pushing too hard, trying to bargain for an unreasonably low price, you don't have to deal with that customer because there are many more buyers. That's a competitive market. And vice versa from the perspective of the buyer. If one seller charges too high of a price, I don't like that price, it's too expensive, because the market is competitive, there are many other sellers of similar products. I can buy somewhere else. So that particular seller cannot influence the price that I will buy at. So that is a competitive market. There is many more details to study about that. We'll have a whole chapter. This will be, according to the plan right now, this will be the last chapter for this semester. There's a whole chapter on competitive markets. But just to give you an example of other markets, right, which we'll not have time to study for, is, for example, monopoly, right? Is a market where there is one seller and many buyers, right? In that case, of course, the seller can influence the market price, right? Because he's the only seller. If he wants to, he might charge a higher price.
Aren't monopolies illegal?
Monopolies are generally illegal in some areas, in many areas. That's why we have antitrust regulation in most countries of the world. But in some areas, monopolies are mandated. They are not only legal, they are the only thing that is allowed. For example, we can only buy electricity from Thai Power here, right? We can't buy electricity from, I can't set up a company which will sell electricity to the population, right? Although that might be profitable actually, right? Taiwan has an amazing potential for solar energy, for example. Taiwan has an amazing potential for a lot of things, for hydropower, some particular type of hydropower, because sometimes there isn't enough water in Taiwan. When rainfall is not enough, right?
But is it actually illegal to begin another electrical company, or is it like that people just don't do it?
As far as I understand, I might not really know much of the regulation in Taiwan. And in many countries, regulation is similar. You might set up your own company, for example, generating electricity. I'm not sure if that's allowed in Taiwan. Perhaps the Taiwan regulation is pretty strict. I'm not sure if we can do that with a private company. But if it's possible, I would guess this is the maximum extent I can get into this business. I would be able to generate my own electricity, but I would not be able to sell it to you guys. Thai Power has monopoly, legal monopoly over selling to the population. So I would have to sell my electricity first to Thai Power, and then they would be able to charge a different price to you guys. So I'm not sure if I can set up my own generator as a business. I'm not really sure. Perhaps it's pretty strict in Taiwan. In the US, of course, you can have a lot of private generators, and there are public utility networks that have the rights to sell that electricity to the general public. US is very big, so it's not one company, but they have these regional public networks. All the local generators as a private business, who generate electricity as a private business, they must sell to the local network.
Actually, that was the question, because the U.S. has the largest economy. I think I'm pretty sure that monopolies, I don't know if they're directly legal under the regulations of every state, but you know that I've always seen like news of hearings in Congress about this company establishing a monopoly and it's highly discouraging. So I just wanted to know.
Yeah, there is antitrust regulation, right? So to come to the beginning of my answer, yes, in many or in most industries, there is an antitrust regulation which tries to break up the companies when they're too big.
Yeah.
But the nuance to my answer, and that's a minority of the industries, in some industries the monopoly is actually mandated. Right? But yes, in most industries, the governments try to break up companies if they're too big. Another example. So in that, anyway, different kinds of markets. There are more. There are oligopolies, for example, where we have several buyers and many, where we have several sellers and many buyers. There are monopolies when it's vice versa. We have only one buyer. Let's say a big factory making butter in a village where everyone is a milk farmer, right? All of them are selling milk. I'm the only buyer. I'm the only big guy buying milk. I'll make butter out of it. I can dictate the prices, perhaps, if I'm the only guy who is buying. So different markets. We'll have time to talk about competitive markets for a whole chapter near the end of the semester. For now, we have brief wording about that. Many buyers, many sellers, similar products. Nobody can affect market price. Okay? Nobody can affect market price. And it's really interesting. I had a colleague, he retired already, who worked in some of those litigations. Litigation is a case in court, right? Trying to break up some of the large companies in the US. And it's really interesting. It's not like you can just set a law easily and say, okay, monopolies are illegal, right? There is a lot of argument here, right? Of course, the company owners might argue that they are not a monopoly, whereas perhaps some of their customers might try to argue, hey, you're a monopoly, you're gonna be broken down, right? So it's usually going to court because with economics, right, it's easy to draw some lines for some sort of economic model saying that, okay, we are looking at the market for bread, right? And perhaps we have only one seller of bread in this whole region, in Florida, maybe we only have one seller of bread, right? And Floridians perhaps will ask that company to be broken down, but maybe the owner of that company will say, hey, look at all those bakeries, right? That's also just a different kind of bread. You don't have to buy my loaf bread. You can buy all the different kinds of sweetened or whatever different kinds of flavors of bread. So it's not like, okay, monopoly is illegal and we just simply can't have it. It's not like murdering is illegal and it's more or less clear cut, right? With monopolies, there is so much argument like for and against in both cases, right? Because that monopoly in Florida might say, well, on a national level, I'm not a monopoly. There are another 100 companies making bread. You don't have to buy from me, just order your bread from Louisiana or whatever, right? So usually these things are thrown to court, and it's really interesting because there is like millions and sometimes billions of dollars on the line, right? And it's really, really interesting. I had a colleague who already retired, unfortunately. It's really interesting to work with him. He worked in the FERC, Federal Regulatory Energy Commission. So that's a commission looking at a lot of large local energy companies and sometimes taking them to court. It's pretty interesting. Yes, and there's like millions and billions in each court case, right? And it's pretty cool. But yeah, we have to come back to this chapter, I guess. Demand is, what is demand? Before we jump into demand, just one more definition. And we're going to talk about this chapter for 2 weeks. I think in the first week there isn't much to calculate, unfortunately. I like it when there are things to calculate, so there are some charts to look at. So we'll have more of that next week. This week perhaps a bit dry, when there are a lot of explanations which are just descriptive. Okay, so if you are just waiting to take notes of any formulas or calculations, there isn't much of that. So on the test, you'll still have all of these dry definitions as well. Okay. So to continue with relative price is just a ratio, right? It's just a ratio of the price of one good to another. It's kind of important for demand and supply because let's look at meat, right? Let's look at different kinds of meat. Let's say pork and beef, right? So let's say last year a kilo of beef, I don't know how much, let's say 200 NT. A kilo of pork, let's say 100 NT, for example, right? Let's say this year, a kilo of beef, let's say 300 NT, and a kilo of pork is, let's say, 230 NT. Okay? Both prices have risen, right? But do you think this year people will buy more pork or more beef? More beef, because relatively speaking, beef is now relatively cheaper than pork. Because last year, beef was twice as expensive as pork, right? 200 versus 100, whereas this year, the price of beef is 300, the price of pork is 230. Beef is only about, I don't know, 30% more expensive than pork, right? So relative price is kind of important because it influences people's demands. Right? Okay. So now we can jump into demand and supply. Okay. So sometimes in our day-to-day conversations, demand has more or less similar meaning to want, right? Like, I demand you go clean your room or something, right? I want you to go clean your room. For economics, it's not enough, okay? Because in that case, if you just want to have that sports car, you might not be able to influence the market in any way if you don't have any means, if you cannot afford that sports car, right? So demand in economics consists of wants. Yes, you're going to want it. If you don't want that sports car, you are definitely not in the number of people who are contributing to the demand for that sports car, right? If you want it, you still might not. Okay, it depends on whether you can afford it, right? And even if you can afford a sports car, perhaps you are still not contributing to the demand for those sports cars, because maybe this year, instead of buying that sports car, you'll instead invest into a mansion somewhere else, right? Or you will buy something else. So plan, probably not enough space between the words, plan to buy. Okay. So in economics, okay, demand consists of people's wishes to buy something, also their ability to do so, and also their particular plan to buy it at a particular period in time. So we can have a look at an annual demand for pizza in Kaohsiung, or a monthly demand for, I don't know, a paracetamol in Taiwan, whatever, right? So there's that, and what else? There is demand, and there is a bit of a difference between demand and quantity demanded. Hard to read it. A lot of words are misspelled and shortened. Quantity demanded is the amount of goods. Okay, it doesn't have. I don't have to have that. Actually, it still works. Is the amount people plan to buy at a particular price. So notice the difference here. We don't talk about the price, right? So if you try to put demand on a chart, we like to put things on a chart in economics. Let's start with high school. Usually we have X here and Y here, right? Yes. And if I have a function, Y equals some kind of a function of X, there's a whole curve for that, right? There's a function, there's a relationship between X and Y, right? There's a relationship between X and Y. Generally, as X increases, Y also increases. Sometimes faster, sometimes slower, and so on. There's a relationship, right? And in that relationship, if I just choose one point, A, right? There, I could say that at this particular price, now let's introduce this as price, right? At this particular price, this is the quantity, this is the amount people would plan to buy. So there is the difference. Okay, demand is a whole function, right? Demand is a whole function. What kind of function? Well, it's a relationship. Demand is a relationship between price and quantity demanded, okay? Such that and usually this condition is so common that in economics we call it the law of demand, okay? The higher is the price, I'll use this sign for then, therefore, hence, so, okay? The higher is the price, the lower is the quantity demanded, and vice versa. With the different color, the lower is the price, the higher is the quantity demanded. So all of this is in your lecture notes on Moodle, all of the wording, all of the typing and writing. You can read through all of that. Hence here I try to use notation to make my writing shorter and faster. Okay. So the distinction between these two is demand is a whole function, is a whole curve. And quantity demand is just one point on that curve. Okay. So how does that function look like? If the relationship is inverse between price and quantity, right? Then it's going to be a downward sloped line, right? It could be a straight line, it could be not a straight line. It depends on what you get in your problem, right, on the exams, okay? But generally it's a downward sloped line. It's not all 100% cases where demand is downward sloped, but perhaps for 99.9% of everything we can think of, the demand function is downward sloped. Chocolates, ice cream, pizza, chairs, tables, desks, shoes, right? There is like a rare instance of particular goods in economics that have an upward slope demand, meaning that when price increases, people buy more of it. Okay.
Maybe like Apple.
Apples?
Yeah, because Apple is like the customer. They're like.
Oh, you mean the company?
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about the fruit.
No, I mean the buyers. They're on the peak of the Maslow hierarchy of needs, so it's like they just want to prove themselves. So the higher the price is, they will buy more.
That's a good point. I was going to say, there are two examples for this, yes. One is a more modern example, not a traditional one. Your example is more modern, yes. In economics, nowadays people say some luxury status goods might not comply with the law of demand. The higher the price is, the more people want it sometimes to show off, right? If Apple watches were really cheap, perhaps, would you argue that more people would buy it? Maybe still more people would buy it. Maybe it's not an extravagant example of like of something that doesn't comply with the law of demand. But conceptually, I don't know, you might think of something really luxury where people want more of it if the price is higher. But then if the price is lower, wouldn't more people buy it? More people will be able to afford it, right? So this is more modern interpretation. Some younger economists do go for that, actually. I'm still on the fence here. I'm not really sure. But a traditional other example for a product that doesn't comply with the law of demand, really interesting. It's only like worked perhaps 100 years ago and more. Those are called giffen goods. We're moving away from the chapter quite a lot, but we'll see how we can catch up. Giffen goods are really interesting. Let's say, for example, we look at, I don't know, the way people lived couple of hundred years ago. You have a very low income. You can basically use your income to buy a little bit of meat and some amount of bread and not much else, right? And now if the price of bread is higher, if you keep the same amount of meat in your ration, then you don't have much money left for the bread. So you just don't buy meat and buy more bread. So the price of bread went up and we buy more bread. We just give up give up eating meat, right? So yeah, a couple of examples, but quite rare. Hard to find, hard to argue, hard to support with data, right? What if Apple Watch is cheaper? Do you really think less people would buy it, right? How much is an Apple Watch? I don't really know. Let's say, what, 30,000 NT? I'm just guessing. I've never owned any kind of Apple products.
Like 1,000 USD, I think.
So 30,000 NT, right? If it was instead 22,000 NT instead of 30,000 NT, do you think really less people are going to buy it? Perhaps more people are going to buy it, right?
Well, the thing about that example is that the reason why Apple can maintain that high price is specifically because they know that people want to buy that expensive item. it's just like the case for let's say companies that don't necessarily do advertising because they don't need to do it.
Ferrari.
For example,
Ferrari,
Lamborghini, whichever one of those. If they lower the price of their vehicles, people won't necessarily go and buy them because they won't be able to brag and say,
That's right, yes.
I don't have.
Absolutely.
I
I understand and I partially agree with that argument, yes. But really, like, let's say Ferrari, right? How much is that? Let's say $300,000, right? $300,000.
The cheap one.
Perhaps, yes, right? Well, actually in Taiwan, the taxes are exorbitant. The vehicle tax in Taiwan is around 50%, right? Just 50?
Yeah, but because in my country it's like 3 times more.
You mean 150%?
Yeah.
The tax?
Yeah.
That's really crazy.
So everybody walks.
Yeah. Or cycling. It's pretty good for your health, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know, perhaps you are right. But originally I thought 50% tax is pretty high on car imports. Anyway, a car that would cost $300,000 in the US or in Europe would cost something like $450,000 here in Taiwan, right? Anyway, $300,000 Ferrari. If it were priced at, I don't know, $120,000. So let's say $300,000, right? How many people would want to buy that Ferrari per year? Let's say 100 people? Let's say, right? If the price were instead 120,000, do you think less people would want to buy it?
Yes.
There be more people who will just go for it.
I think less people would buy it after the long run. Like at the beginning, everybody would be like, wow, Ferraris are half price now.
Yeah.
So I'll buy it.
Yeah,
but
that's right. Yeah.
Afterwards, they'll be like, oh, you know what?
Yeah.
Because they're not buying
Maintaining
it
the
for-
brand,
They're
yes.
not buying it because of the price. They're buying a brand.
Absolutely, yes. So yeah, I think there is an argument here, both ways, I think, right? You could say, okay, in the short term, demand is downward slope because more people will buy at 120 instead of 300. But in the long term, you're arguing, in the long term, demand is perhaps upward slope, right? Because if the price is lower, they will not be able to maintain those high class, high wealth customers. Right? So yeah, both ways, we could go both ways here. It's kind of gray area here, I guess. But for most products, the law of demand stands. Okay, and there it is. So of course we have downward slope demand curve for most of our problems. And we'll look at this demand curve in 2 ways, actually. It's not that we have X here determining Y in one-way direction, okay? We can look at demand curve both ways, okay? So usually in economics we put, let's make it bigger. Usually in economics we put quantity on the horizontal axis, price on the vertical axis, not the other way around. Although for production possibilities frontier, PPF, right? It didn't matter which one you put where. The bakery can make either buns or cakes, whichever you put it, doesn't matter. For this quantity on the horizontal axis, price on the vertical axis, let's say we have some sort of demand function like this. Let's call demand for pork. Maybe this is pork. Okay. So one way to look at it is the way we've described in the law of demand. Price kind of determines quantity demanded. If price drops, more people are going to buy it. Quantity demanded increases, right? So that's one way to look at demand interpretation from vertical to horizontal. But there is also another way to look at it. We can look at it from horizontal to vertical in terms of the way we understand it, right? So let's use another color. If I want at given quantities sold, right? At given quantities sold, at given quantities available, right? The maximum people are happy enough to pay is this price. So demand over here from this interpretation, from horizontal to vertical, is also equal to willingness to pay. So I have here willingness to pay. So of course, the more of the product is available for conventional goods that do comply with the law of demand. The more of the products is available, the less people are happy enough to pay for it at the maximum. Okay? So over here, for example, if we have much more of this available, okay, the maximum that I can charge, the highest willingness to pay, is going to be lower. Let's give you an example. Maybe some of you might not agree with that statement. Okay, let's say we have 60 people here, right? And let's say I have 4 slices of pizza, right? Let's say everyone is really hungry, but perhaps you have different amounts of money in the pocket. Perhaps the amount of hunger you can tolerate is different. Perhaps your tolerance levels are different, right? Perhaps some of you are used to having no breakfast. Some of you are used to having breakfast. So now you are really hungry. I don't know, all the differences. With 4 slices of pizza, if, let's say, I'm not allowed to discriminate, so if I charge the price of pizzas, then it must be the same price for all 4 slices, right? What I could do is I could have some sort of auction, right? And just sell these 4 slices of pizza to those 4 people who are happy enough to pay the highest price, and that will be the same price. Even though perhaps some of those 4 will be happy to pay even higher than the other person, if I'm not allowed to discriminate, that will be the same price, right? If instead I have 10 slices of pizza, right? I have to include the other 6 people who weren't in the top 4. So if I am not allowed to discriminate, by definition, all the prices will be lower, right? So with more quantity, okay, the maximum I can get, if I'm not allowed to discriminate, will be lower, right? But of course, if I am allowed to discriminate, that's a different topic in economics and in business, right? If I can sell the first 4 pizzas at this price, right? This is 4, and this is 10, and the next 6 pizzas at a different price, I could collect more money, of course, right? And that's airlines, right? If you're a businessman, you got to travel somewhere tomorrow, the price is going to be higher. So that's a form of price discrimination, right? Because airlines know that you're going to go tomorrow, right? Whereas if you're a student booking your holiday, trying to wiggle somewhere for the cheapest available airline tickets, you're checking the calendars, right? Checking the ticket prices for a number of days, for like a range of days, right? You're choosing the lowest price, right? Then of course you will be one of those who is paying the cheaper price, right? Perhaps the guy next to you in the same seat, not in the same seat, but in the same airplane, right? In the seat next to you has paid, I don't know, triple the amount of your ticket. You'll be like, yay. And he'll be like, oh, damn it. Don't tell me about that. Right? Price discrimination, it actually exists, but it's kind of tricky, right? We can't just do it openly. Or you are buying this chocolate from 7-Eleven. You really love chocolate? Then it's double the price for you. You are not really in love of chocolate. Then okay, you can get it cheaper. So anyway, there's that. I think I'm spending too much time with all of this. We'll have to spend more time covering this, Chuck.
Really? No, sorry, just one question. You mentioned the airline thing. Why is it that airlines are allowed to do that?
Because it's kind of a sly way of price discrimination. It's not an open price discrimination, right? It's instead some sort of a discount, right? Instead of like starting at this price, at a student price, and charging extra if you're an investor or entrepreneur or businessman, right? We basically start with some prices and sometimes provide discounts. So another way to look at it is, I don't know, some buy 2, get 1 extra is also, maybe you might argue, some sort of a price discrimination, right? If you are from a lower income family who is trying to hunt for those bargains, right? Then perhaps the company is just trying to sell more at a lower price. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sold it, they would just sell 4 pizzas, right? They don't want to reduce everybody's price, only to those who are really hunting. So okay, if you buy 3, you'll have to store them in the fridge, right? You've got to use them for the next 3 weeks. So, okay, for you guys, we're going to sell this at a lower price, but we don't decrease our general price, right? So it's really interesting, very tricky ways that kind of business and economics kind of interact. A lot of people view this as like really boring because, okay, I know the law of demand. How does it help me to run the business? Frankly, it doesn't really, right? It doesn't really, right? Because you gotta be a seller. You gotta be a manager, right? You gotta know how to work with people in your own company. You gotta know how to delegate. You gotta know how to make people work, right? You gotta know how to be like hard with them, right? You also you gotta know how to sell your product when you're talking to potential customers. It's so much. That's why we have like profit as one of the payments for one of the factors of production, entrepreneurship, right? So yeah, some people will like think at this as useless theory, and partially that's true, right? But there is some connections if you really like think about it, right? Whether it's really going to be helpful in running your business, it's questionable. Maybe you might come up with some ideas for your pricing policy, right? But again, a lot of entrepreneurship is quite different, right? Anyway, back to, we keep diverging into all of these interesting topics. We can't cover this chapter. Willingness to pay, okay. Okay, and willingness to pay is marginal benefit as well. So another big part of economics is that demand also shows us marginal benefit. We've already talked a lot about marginal benefit, right? So it is a big part of economics. And big idea here is demand shows marginal benefit. Why? Because my willingness to pay is marginal benefit, right? So for example, if I give you this slice of pizza, right? And start auctioning with you, just like I gave you an example near the beginning of the semester, right? If I tell you, okay, are you happy enough to pay me 1 NT for this slice of pizza? You say yes, then I increase the price. How about 5 NT? How about 10 NT? And at some moment you're gonna say no, right? Close to that range is the value, the monetary value of having that slice of pizza, right? So that's your willingness to pay, and that's the monetary value of your benefit from this additional 1 slice of pizza, so that's marginal benefit, right? So that is a big deal. We can often just forget about this, okay? Demand shows marginal benefit. Okay, demand shows marginal benefit to the consumer. Okay, so there's that. And demand changes. Now demand changes. Let's put marginal benefit here. Let's make some space. So changes in demand, okay? Factors other than price that affect people's plans to buy. So factors other than the price that affect people's plans to buy change demand and shift demand curve. Okay. So something may be questionable here. Why not price? Right? We've just said that if price changes, maybe more people will buy it. Is that right? Because here we are looking at change of the whole function, right? If we look at demand, let's say this is the demand for Apple watches, right? If I try to push my agenda, if it's not an upper slope demand curve, it doesn't matter. Let's say this is demand for regular shoes, right? If the price changes, the demand function doesn't change. The function, the curve is still there. We just move from one point to another. right? It's just like we still have the same function. We just change x, and we get a different number, but the function is still the same, right? To change the whole function, we need other changes. Like, for example, if this is ice cream, right? Not shoes anymore, let's say this is ice cream. This is ice cream, and let's say the weather changes, it's really cold outside, right? Whatever is the price, at this price, less people are, whatever is the price doesn't matter. At this price, less people are going to buy, right? So the commodity is going to be lower, right? If the weather is really cold for some reason. At this price, still less people are going to buy, blue versus red. Even if the price is this, when the weather is cold, only this many people will buy it, as opposed to this many people buying when the weather is hot. Blue is cold, red is hot, right? So it doesn't matter what price you look at, the whole function changes. It's now a different function. We have, let's say, G equals, or maybe we'll just keep it same notation, for example. It's a different function. It's y prime. It's a different word, different letter, right? Equals g of x, right? Something like that. Anyway, it's a different function, right? So what are those factors that change demand? I don't know if, okay, looks like the screen can still kind of see me. What are the factors? Let me take a list so I don't skip any. One of those factors is prices of related goods, okay? One of those factors is prices of related goods. Let's give you an example. Last year, a kilo of beef, 200 NT. Kilo of chicken, 60 NT. Okay? This year, the price of beef is unchanged, for example, but the price of chicken has tripled to 180 NT, right? If we're actually looking at the market for beef, what do you think will happen to the demand for beef? Will generally more people buy beef when the price of chicken has tripled? Yeah, perhaps. Because they used to buy chicken, now it's more expensive. Yeah, they will switch to beef. Maybe they used to buy chicken, they like beef, but they used to buy chicken because it's so cheap. Now it's kind of similar price, chicken is still cheaper, 180 versus 300, but still some people are going to switch to beef, right? So prices of relative goods, okay? So in this example we have chicken and beef, right? Those two goods can be consumed instead of one another, right? That is one particular type of goods which are substitute goods. Okay? For substitute goods, okay, if the price of related substitute increases, right, demand for your product also increases. And vice versa. Because if the price of chicken, something related, is more expensive, the price of beef, the actual thing we are looking at, that's the price. The demand for beef is higher, right? And vice versa. So another color for that, like this. What if we look at? Huh? Yeah. Was there an example? No, I thought somebody wants to give an example. I'm trying to look at a different kind of relationship now, because there are two kinds of relationship. Complements, something that must go together. Huh?
Water bottle.
And?
I just want to type water bottle ring.
It's still a substitute because one can be used instead of another, but I'm looking at a different subtopic now where they must go together. For example, tires and a car, right? If for some reason, I don't know, we have a rubber shortage in the world and the tires increase in price 10x, 10 times higher. For example, silly example, but whatever, right? Perhaps much fewer people will buy a car because changing tires will be exorbitantly expensive. They will walk or take a bus. Perhaps the bus fare will increase as well. Right? So that's another kind of relationship called complements. These are the things that must be consumed together. Okay, all definitions, I don't want to write it out. So things that must be consumed together, complements. In that case, if the price of a related complement increases, then demand decreases, right? Because if tires are much more expensive, people are not going to buy a car. Let's say we're looking at the demand for cars. And then vice versa, right? Different color for that. If petrol, gas, tires, rubber, all of that is much cheaper this year, perhaps more people will decide to buy cars, right? So that's I'm sorry. Black color for different directions. Okay? So far so good? Let's go for a break.